Well, we are in this season of Lent, and we are looking at the teachings of Jesus to find the courage to resist anything in our lives or in our world that causes harm or breaks relationships. I find it fascinating that the way that these stories, these parables of Jesus that he tells, they are always both personal and political. They relate to us as individuals and our families and our immediate relationships, and they also speak to our social contracts, our connections across societies and cultures, hopefully for the common good. So this story about a father with two sons, or maybe it's a story about two brothers with a father, it does both of these things. This is a story as old as time, and it's also a problematic one, because from the beginning of our scriptures in Genesis, it is rife with sibling rivalry. And often there is this maybe countercultural preference for the younger over the elder. We can think of the stories of Abel and Cain, of Jacob and Esau, of Joseph and all of his brothers. Sibling relationships are fraught with distrust, deceit, sometimes danger. But now Jesus is talking about this theme that everyone can relate to, and he's giving it some new meaning. We could say he's restoring. Restoring, in this sense, involves revisiting, reinterpreting past experiences or past narratives to construct new ones that are more empowering stories. Author and activist Mary DeMacher introduces this idea, or this word, restoring, as a method for proposing powerful new narratives, ones that are capable of replacing maybe old stories of injustice or abuse of power. So this time, with this story, Jesus is looking out at a combined audience of insiders and outsiders. He's walking with a group of Pharisees, those religious leaders who represent the people who believe that they are accepted by God because they follow the laws and they fit in with the social expectations of their time. And as this group is walking out of the synagogue, another group made up of tax collectors, those who were considered traitors to their country, and poor people and sick people, those who were considered unclean, had come around to listen to Jesus. Now, the religious leaders started to grumble, and I'm pretty sure you could feel the tension and the looks of judgment and reproach that flew between these two groups. So, surprise, surprise, Jesus starts telling stories, because that's what he does. He starts with one about a shepherd who leaves the whole flock behind to go in search of one lost lamb. And then there's another story about a woman who had 10 coins of silver, and she loses one, and she goes crazy sweeping the house until she finds it. And she's so excited that she found it, she can't wait to tell her friends she has this back. And I'm guessing that the law and order group were still glaring at the outcast, so decided to launch into one more story. This is the once upon a time there was a man who had two sons. And as it tends to go, this younger son was maybe a little bit spoiled and unrealistic about life. He was sure he could do anything if he put his mind to it, and had enough money, of course. So he decided to set out on his own if his dad would just give him what he would have inherited later, right? That makes sense. His father, who loved him so much, agreed. Wrote him a check, gave him whatever it would take to have his part of his inheritance. And the son took off for the big city and apparently gambled away his money. His older brother, the more responsible one, probably was grumbling under his breath even as he watched him leave. Might have been thinking, good riddance, that kid never does his share of the work anyway, and he's always causing trouble. So our story has three characters to consider and to identify with. There's the oldest son, there's the baby of the family, and there's the dad. And we probably all know someone who's like the younger son, or a family whose child has gone astray and maybe getting caught up with addiction, or seeing some jail time, or struggling with mental illness, or just making poor decisions. We all know about the lost child of a family, ones whose relatives try not to speak of her or do so with a sense of judgment. And That mixture of feelings of anger or frustration, of hopelessness, of worry, and helplessness. Maybe some of us have been that child. And it's interesting, this story is usually referred to as the story of the prodigal son, but the word is not actually in the Bible. It's added by the editors to help you find this story if you're looking for it. But it's a good word, and I think it means more than we have been led to assume, this word prodigal. For prodigal means spending money or resources freely and recklessly, wastefully, in an extravagant manner. So in a sense, it does describe this foolish, irresponsible youngest child. But prodigal can also mean giving something away on a lavish scale, like being generous, being liberal and extravagant, and unsparing with what one has. So, who is the prodigal? Now it sounds like we could be describing the father, this father who loves his child enough to let him go, who misses him and thinks of him every day. This father who sees this poor, ragged, starving son come back up the road towards home, and he runs very unprofessionally, unself-consciously out of the house and down the road to meet him and embrace him. He doesn't even listen to the boy's explanation. He doesn't grill him on where that money went and how he plans to repay it. None of that. He just hugs him and gets him some new clothes, and he starts planning a party. Now this is a story of a prodigal father who loves too much, who loves wastefully and liberally and extravagantly and, unconditionally. And this father can't wait to share this joy over the child who is lost and now found. His happiness is contagious, or his happiness might be infuriating in the eyes of the older brother. The one who has stayed home and working hard and doing his duty and earning his keep, surely earning a party. This is unbelievable. For the older brother bears the burden of goodness, not unlike the scribes and the Pharisees. Being a good child can be a burden too. You feel like you have to deliver. You can't make mistakes. Your family honor depends on you. Goodness can be its own prison. There's no grace in goodness that must earn its status. And as the story continues, this brother is not about to step foot in the house and watch this undeserving brother get all the attention. He is not going to sit down and share a meal with that guy as if nothing had happened, as if he had any right to be accepted back into this family. It's just not right. So our parable sheds light on two very different reactions to grace, to love, to forgiveness, because that's what grace is. It's freely given. One response is, if you're the one who is down and out, to receive it with shock and delight. The other response, when you've been the hardworking one playing by the rules, the response might be feeling resentful. It just goes against the grain. The older son resents his brother because this father has thrown a party for this loser of a brother. He can't even bring himself to call him brother. He says, the son of yours. The older brother, the loyal one, is lost too. For he's lost in his need to be right. He's alienated, standing outside of the joy. Now, one interesting thing I think about this story is that we really can often all identify with all of these characters. Maybe each one represents some portion of ourselves. Maybe at some point in time we've made similar good or bad decisions. And it feels personal. And if you think about it, it's also political. Because whole nations can become self-righteous. Governments can and do create scapegoats and prodigals. We can collectively project our guilt and our failure on others, maybe undocumented residents, people who are non-binary, and all of our political opponents. The story is about you and me and how we understand the character of God and it's about how we together create the world that we live in. Jesus was telling the story to the religious leaders, the people with power. People with the power to exclude those they thought were not worthy of anyone caring about them. They had the power to take away their rights and their self-respect. At that time, if you had a criminal record, a physical disability, a mental illness, if you were just born into a poor family, you were pushed to the margins. And this was in their mind proof that God rewards the righteous, law-abiding citizens, serves as an example to others to stay in line and stay in your place. But Jesus is retelling this age-old story of sibling rivalry with a new ending. God is not a parent who plays favorites. This story is so important because in this Father we see God's grace. We see a love that is greater than anything that we could do wrong. We are assured that God's love never ends and God's love welcomes every lost child. Gray Olesta points out that when Jesus tells this story of relationship fractures here, the expected conclusion of this storyline is that that fracture will remain. Generation after generation, the cycle continues. But by telling this story where the lost son is restored into his family, ancient symbols are being relocated. We can remember the father figure in the Garden of Eden who casts out children following their eating of forbidden fruit. And now we get this father who rushes out to feed his child following a return from bad decisions and a horrible season of his life. The use of the father figure in this parable works to restore a narrative that has perpetuated a cycle of strife and enmity. This story invites the Pharisees and the Pharisee in all of us to let go of our perfectionism, teaching us that we are not loved for doing the right thing. We are beloved children even when we make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, even when we make bad decisions or we have flaws that may or may not be our own fault. This story reassures outcasts and marginalized lost sheep of the family that we have value, that we have hope for a future that includes our strengths as well as our weaknesses. And this story invites our culture and our society to seek out those who have been lost, to rehabilitate rather than punish, to heal generational traumas, to end cycles of violence. So now in our time, we have the power to create a better world for those left out, for those born into poverty, for those caught in addiction, even for those who might have squandered some of their opportunities. And this world will also be a better world for all those older brothers fearfully believing that love and acceptance requires their perfection. This is the good news that we find in the words and the actions of Jesus. We are all beloved children of God. And together we are called to care for one another and to resist the powers that seek to leave anyone outside of God's extravagant love.